Welcome to ITSE 1345 PL/SQL. This is a second class in a series. One of the idiosyncrasies that's come across over time is that most classes, when they're built, the first semester is like 1301 and the second semester is like 2301. And actually 1345 is the second class and 2309 is the first class. So ITSE 2309 is the first class and 1345 is the second class in the series. And I say that because over the years we've had this issue where students will enroll in a class because they see the 1-3 and they see the 2-3. Because of that, I usually go through an assessment process at the very beginning of the semester to make sure that the student is in the right place at the right time. In the first class, there was the idea of the relational database theory, okay? And they had the primary key, and they had normalization, and had ER structures, so there was idea of how a database works. On top of that, there was the secondary issue because you have the lecture and the lab, and the lab was part of how you learn to use SQL. And SQL is one of the core elements that you have to have a really good handle on when you work with PL/SQL. So what we're going to look at is that you have a strong understanding of the relational database theory so you can understand how table joins work, PL/SQL, and let's get back to the joins. One of the critical elements when you're doing PL/SQL is that you're going to extract data and then you're going to process through some mechanism. Well, when you extract data, you have your left join, your right join, and your intersection. So you have to be really comfortable with joins in order for you to progress in PL/SQL. So what I want to look at the beginning is a good understanding, once again, of the relational database theory, primary foreign keys, and SQL. Now, over the years, I've struggled on how you can get this concept of PL/SQL across to the student. So I finally came up with this example that has worked well over the years. It's a quite lengthy example that we're going to go through as the intro progresses so you can kind of get an idea of how complex this process is. There will be 15 major items that we'll be talking about. As we begin with how you're going to use SQL to extract data, and then once that data is exported into another process, there is a mechanism in PL/SQL that captures this data and processes this data. The item is called a block. Now within the block there is a declare section. Now the declare section is where you identify the placeholders that are going to hold the information you're going to extract. The begin is where you put the select from where that's going to extract the data. The exception is where you capture information that is outside some established parameters. Yes, it could be an error, or it could be something that maybe it's outside parameters. It doesn't necessarily have to be an error. It could be just data that's not consistent with what you're looking for, and then you in. Now, there are two kinds of blocks. There's the anonymous block that is not stored, and there's a name block that is stored. So we're going to look at two features. As we continue with this, we're going to really look into the exception handling. Now the exception handling is a mechanism that, yes, it extracts the data, go to the next event so you don't lose track of what you're doing. And you can develop some processes where as you do the exception, you can give yourself messages. Hey, I ran out of employees, so I'm going to go to the next level. Hey, I found this thing that's not right. So the exception is the mechanism to give you notices or alerts or capture data. Now, we're going to spend quite a bit of time, the first part of the class period or semester, talking about the placeholders that we're going to be working with, the variables. Now, there are the precision of the numbers, and then there's the testing of the information. Now, Oracle has evolved over time. Initially, there was just the if, then they came with the else is.
Now they have a case. So we're going to manage this process. Also understand that some of the old legacy systems still have some very, very old code. It works, so let's not mess with it. But as you develop this process, we need to look at the recursive mechanism. So now, going back to the employee scenario, as you bring a batch over, you want to loop through those things. You want to have a continuous process where you loop. Now, the other thing is that there's a tool, a mechanism that is really nice with PL SQL, and this is called the cursor. Now, the cursor is this tool that you call on to go to the database, extract information, bring it over. Now, the cursor can bring one record at a time, can bring multiple records at a time, can also have a scenario where you have, let's take a school bus. You know, you have a school bus of kids, you go pick them up and you drop them off. Now, the question is, are you picking up the same kids you dropped off or different kids? The other thing is that on the school bus, you can have assigned seats. So when you deliver 40 kids, you're going to pick the identical 40 because they're all going to be in the same seat. So the cursor allows you to have organized transmission and delivery or unorganized pickup, transport, and delivery of the data. Now, I went back and I said that you had to create a mirror image. In a database, when you sort something, there's indexing, last name, first name, or there's always some way to organize data. Now, as you extract data from the database and stick it into this process, into this methodology is going to handle the results of the data, you also have to organize it within this mirror image. Well, the process that is used to organize, sort, index, or whatever you want to do within this new PL SQL methodology is called collections. And we're going to look at collections. Now, up to this point, we have identified all the items that are going to be used to do the work. Now, the procedure is the first major block that we're going to work with. The second one is the function. Now, the distinction between a procedure and a function is a calculator. It will create a return. Now, the return that it gives you does not need to be numeric. The return that it gives you could be some name, some event. So just because we say a function has a return, it does not necessarily have to be a numeric value. It could be the name of a person, it could be the event, it could be something, but a function always brings back something, where a procedure is just something that handles what's happening. Now, going back to that payroll scenario where I had the packages, we had the retirement, you had the FICA, you had the insurance. Each of those could be considered a procedure. Now, all three of them could be considered a package, the deduction package. So all those could work as a unit. And finally, we're going to look at triggers. Triggers are interesting in that they work kind of as an alarm mechanism. Something has to happen to make a trigger work. Now, what a trigger does, a trigger holds procedures. So a trigger is a method that says, if this happens, I want you to do this. Now, a trigger can happen before, during, or after. So sometimes you have to be very alert as to how you're going to activate a trigger. And those are the 15 items we'll be talking about this semester.
And usually when I have a classroom environment, I give a test the first day. And the test is not really to have a pass-fail scenario, is that sometimes you take a class, and you know the theory goes that a year after the class, you remember 20 and you forget 80. So what I like kind of review process. So the first day I give a review to make sure that you are kind of familiar with the material we're going to cover. Not an expert, but you've been exposed to it at some time, but you know there are more important things in life, so you just not really into it. So I give an assessment, and then we progress. Now, the item that I like to get across is on how PL SQL works is that of an employee scenario where someone makes $10 an hour and works 40 hours. Okay, so you make 10 bucks an hour and you work 40 hours. Everyone can relate to that. And I use this because as we go through progression through this process, you can see how everything is going to kind of cascade into it. So what I'd like to do is kind of begin with that example.
This is a really simple example that I've used over the years that allows me to connect the dots as the semester progresses. So this is how we're going to learn to work with PL SQL. So you have $10 an hour, you have 40 hours. Now that's going to give you $400. Now, as we all know, there will be FICA, retirement, insurance. So now that you have these items, we're going to have to figure out some way to hold these things. Now, stop and think. Every pay period has a current period, a prior period, month to date, and of course, year to date. And as you go with the progression, you can see how you have $400, you have prior period, you have month to date, and then you have year to date. Now, that's just on the dollars. You also have to capture the hours. Now, he worked 40 hours. You have prior period. You have overtime issues that you have to contend with. You have month-to-date issues you have to contend with. You have year-to-date items to contend to. Now, at this point, just stop and think of where we're at. Now, let's continue that most businesses operate on an October 1 to September 30th time frame. So as you can tell, you keep adding these items and you keep adding these items. So, you're going to have to capture this information for the business year. And you keep going and you have month to date, year to date. As you continue to see, look at all the items that we need to capture. Now we're at 21. And as this thing progresses, you will notice that at the final number is that you have 31 items that we have to capture. And then remember that the way things work is you have IRS year and you have business year. Now the IRS year works from January 1 to December 30th. And as we go through this progression, you will notice that once again that you'll have almost a double issue going. You'll have an accounting issue for January to December. You'll have accounting from October to September. So now you have 31 items you have to capture for the business year. You have 31 items that you have to capture for the IRS year. But then on top of that, you still have FICA retirement insurance for both the IRS year and the business year. Now you have FICA and you have items that you have to capture. Now when we get to the tenure event, when you get to the tenure, this is where we start playing with dates. So, this would take today's date, you subtract the employee hire date, which would give you days of service. And then the days of service divided by the 360 days will give you years of service. And then somewhere along the line, there's something where you have to compare years of service to some retirement rate that will give you, 0 to 7 is 3%, 8 to 15 is 5%, and over 15 years is 7%. So now you've got the October to September, which is 31, 15, and 9, which gives you 55. And on top of that, you have the IRS year that has 31, 15, and 9 to give you 55. So now you have 110 items that you have to take care of. Now, what tools do we need to accomplish this? Well, if we're going to do the $400, you need a calculator. And this is where a function comes in. And if you do more calculations, you're going to need more functions. And as this continues, you'll notice that you have all these items that you have to manage. Now, so far, we've been talking about numbers, but you will need labeling mechanisms to capture all this, and that's where the characters come in. And as we progress and we progress and we progress, you'll see that now you have subtotals that you have to capture. So now we have the business year, and you have, the business year. Now, this is where it gets interesting. If you look at the business year, you have FICA, insurance, and retirement. All these items could be considered a procedure. Now, the whole thing could be considered a package. So this is where we start learning all the items we will have to be playing with. Now, let's look at the retirement calculations. And I do this because Oracle is not that user-friendly on date structure. It is very rigid. It is not forgiving. So I do this to kind of emphasize that as you're working with Oracle dates, you have to be very mindful that Oracle is a very hard structure that you have to deal with. And as we go through this calculations, this kind of gives you an idea that as you're doing this, you have to be very mindful that Oracle is not as user-friendly on the date structure as most other products go. Now, as we go through this thing, you will need to develop a test. How do you test to see which of these items an employee will qualify for? And this is where your if-then scenario comes in, or a case scenario, or an else-if scenario, where you have to test to the other items. Now, we haven't even talked about the employee's name. As we began this process, nowhere did we actually identify an employee name or employee ID. Now, we had 110 items to begin with, but nowhere in those 110 did we have an ID or a name. So that's another level that you have to contend with. The other thing we have to consider is, how do you address the level of precision that you will use in your calculations? Will you be rounding up or you will be rounding down? Now, this is kind of interesting that if I'm going to pay an employee a retirement benefit, I'm going to round to 2 items because it's an expense to the company. So I'm going to give the employee as little as possible. However, if the employee is going to contribute to his retirement, you want to make sure that he contributes the most. So maybe you'll go out 7 or 8 digits. So there is a finesse that you can do with the rounding up or rounding down. Now also consider that if you're going to do an employee process, payroll process, you're going to do these in batches or in clumps. So you will need to develop a recursive mechanism that will go to the database, extract all levels of employees. You know, you may do the hourly, you may do the salary, you may do the executive. So each of these will have to be treated in a different process. Now, one of the more common errors that occurs is on the keyboard, the number 0 and the letter O are very close together on the keyboard. And over the years, I've learned that this seems to be a minor error that happens. So what you need to do, like in this payroll system, you want to be able to capture a small discrepancy like the 0 and the O and not crash the database or the payroll system, because then nobody gets paid. So we're going to look at a process where you capture information that is not consistent. So you extract that item away from your data and you continue with the next employee. So you develop this mechanism of extracting something that's not right and let somebody else worry about it, go back and check it. And that's what we're going to do with the exception.
Now, as we went through this example, you notice that, holy moly, there's a lot of junk I had to take care of. In the example that I cited, you know, you wind up with like 110 different variable mechanisms that you have to really look at. But that's just one little part of it, and that's just to give you an idea of what you have to do. So we're going to look at placeholders, something that will manage the data as we process it. When you're looking at these placeholders, you need to figure out whether they're going to be variable. The variable is going to be character-based, date-based, and the precision of the numbers that you're going to be using. And as with any new language, and that's one of the difficulties I have with this, people come to this class having had other classes. You know, you have C++, you have all kinds of Java, you have Python. There's a lot of other stuff that you come to this class with. And one of the difficulties that I've had is trying to break, this is going to sound silly, trying to make students of old habits they develop in other languages. In that, you know, the one thing that other languages have a common theme in is they're very sequential and they're very structured. Well, that is not the case in PL SQL. Yes, it is organized, but it's not that sequential as you're accustomed to working with. Because of that, you have to be careful not to think linear. You have to think parallel. So the idea of thinking parallel as opposed to linear is a paradigm shift you guys have to get into. And Well, there's just a complexity of issues that you have to address. And I have been very successful with this formula. It's worked well. And that's because using that $10 an hour and 40 hours, as we go through the semester, I will refer you back to that example when we introduce new topics, because that way you can see the connection. And that concludes the summary of the introduction.